Greetings to our audience out there. This is the Knowledge in Action podcast, joining you again with another episode of one of our rich and knowledgeable podcasts to have a conversation about gender inclusion. The Knowledge in Action podcast is produced by TCDC in collaboration with the Danida Fellowship Center, and we are currently hosting guests that we have at the TCDC Arusha Center attending the ESC Youth Fellowship. The ESC Youth Fellowship is a collaboration between the TCDC, the East African Community, the Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete Foundation, the Julius Nyerere Leadership Center, and the Emerging Leaders Foundation. They have come together to design and implement a premier platform for building the capacity of young people to participate in leadership and the regional integration process in the East Africa community. We have 29 young people gathered here to learn, to be tooled and retooled on ways in which they can be able to contribute to governance. And of course, we want to bring you into this conversation, but as we bring you in, we would like you to experience what we are discussing in the class, but also experience what issues are coming up even as we engage in our conversations. This is week 3 of the fellowship, and this week we are discussing governance and politics, youth leadership for the Africa we want. As part of the conversation on youth leadership for the Africa we want, we're going to be having a conversation today about gender inclusion in politics and governance, and we'll be looking at the burden that women have to carry as far as politics and governance is concerned. We are going to be exploring the untold stories behind women and young women's participation in politics. And I have an audience, powerful audience, to help me with this conversation. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves to you one by one. I will begin with my guest, Edgar. Edgar, could you please tell our audience your name, the country you come from, and why you think you're fit for this conversation?
Okay, yeah. Thanks so much, Stella, for hosting me today. I'm Edgar Mutungisa from Uganda. I'm the South African Youth Ambassador to Uganda. I'm very happy to join this conversation about gender inclusion in governance, as has been really a big question, I think, over time. So I'll be happy to be joining and see how we can share insights on how we can improve their participation so that it's really meaningful.
Edgar is going to be my personal favorite in this conversation because we love having conversations with men about how to empower women and engage them in governance. My other guest, also coming from Uganda, is Masi. Masi, could you please introduce yourself to our audience and tell them why you feel so passionate about this topic today?
Hi, guys. So my name is Masi Awino. I am a lawyer. I'm from Uganda, and I am very passionate about gender inclusion in politics and governance. So definitely the right member to be in this podcast, because I'm very passionate about the things that affect women and how women generally engage with the wider society.
Thank you very much, Masi. I would have assumed that you'd have said that just by virtue of the fact that you're a woman, you qualify to sit on this table. As a matter of fact,
Definitely.
you qualify to make decisions about who should be sitting on this table.
Yeah.
Apart from Masi, I also have a third guest from Kenya. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself and share why she is a qualified guest to be sitting on this table.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lilian Magero from Kenya. I qualify to be on this table because I advocate for the rights of women, and I'm very happy when I see women coming out and working hard and making sure that our economy is stable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lilian. I would like to go around the table just inquiring what the thoughts of all my audience are as far as why women should be included in governance and what are some of the burdens that they have seen women carrying as far as governance is concerned. I'll start with Lilian on my direct left, and then we'll proceed around the table just to get a feel of what they understand as the burdens that women and young women generally carry as far as participation and inclusion in governance is concerned.
Actually, women have a lot of burden that they carry mostly in politics. In the political world or in the political field, and more so in Africa, we realize that women are trying their best so that they can get those positions when they are vying for the positions. And we'll realize that in most of the countries that we're coming from, we realize that women are not given equal opportunities as men. As much as we are talking about gender equality, as much as each and every day we say that women have equal opportunity, but in really sense, when it comes to the ground, that is not what is turning out, because you realize that maybe during politics, I'll use politics because it has been common in most of our continent. During politics, for me as a woman to vie for a seat, we have some rules, and mostly you realize that communities that we are coming from, and depending with our culture, we have cultures that does not advocate for we as women to stand, for example, to vie for a position, any position in our country. And they'll come up with a lot of things. For example, if I'm a woman and I'm not married and I'm vying for a seat to present women in our country, in any country that I'm coming from, then there are a lot of questions. Maybe I'm very young, but I have vision and I know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'm going to advocate for the rights of my fellow women. They will ask me a lot of questions like, are you married? For example, if I'm not married in the continent that I'm coming from, then there are high chances that I'll not be given that ticket because I'm not married. For example, we are two. It is me and another man, and maybe that man also is not married, but maybe that man is a divorcee. At the same time, I'm also a divorcee. You realize that in the community and in the mind of the African community, they're like, we are giving that chance for a man because they feel that maybe men, they can do it better. And now when they feel that I'm not married, I'm not in the position to lead a family. And maybe I am a mother. I have kids that I'm taking care of. At the same time, I know the pain of the vulnerable in the society. I know the burden that women carry, because in most cases we realize that women are left at home doing chores at home, and yet they are not given position to maybe advocate for their rights or maybe vie for any seat in any continent. And this thing is very common in the countries that we are coming from, and we need to do something about it because it's not clear. And another thing that is also coming out, maybe I'm vying for a certain seat, and then we are with men in the same panel. They feel like when there's an act, maybe sexual violence, I have a partner who is a man and also is vying for the same seat. They'll like most of the community, they'll turn my name out because they feel that maybe Lilian has slept with that man. And yet the same man that we were in the same act, they'll not condemn him, but they'll condemn only women. And this one is very common in our continent. And we need to speak out loudly, because when any woman was in that act, for example, they were two of them. Why is it that they're only condemning women and they're calling women as if they have nothing, as if they don't have any right to do what other men are doing?
Thank you very much, Lilian. Mercy, would you say that you're having a similar experience in Uganda? Are women supposed to fulfill more cultural obligations before they engage in politics? Are they being judged harshly for doing the things that men do, including sleeping around with their colleagues in the circles? Or do you have a different situation coming from where in Uganda?
I think the general cultural setting of most African states are the same. So yes, in Uganda we are experiencing the same thing as well. I think really generally, to summarize the situation, it's about social construct and how people have over time constructed what women are supposed to do and what men should be doing, who should participate in decision making and in certain spaces. So that the dichotomy that exists between the public and private life of a woman then gives a certain sort of perception to other people in deciding whether or not they should listen to a woman, whether or not they should give space at the decision-making table for a woman. There are certain decisions. Actually, let me just give a scenario to kind of paint a picture on how the woman's burden is and how, in the long run, they're not even appreciated for the things that they do in like supporting society, but even supporting men who participate actively in decision making. If Mr. Edgar here was working at a company and he's earning, say, 500,000 Tanzanian shillings, so Edgar obviously has to pay rent, he has to pay medical bills, he has to do all these things. When you look at all the expenses he needs to make, his expenses would probably be 1 million Tanzanian shillings. But obviously, you see that he's only earning 500,000 Tanzanian shillings. But then Edgar will continue waking up to go to work and not leave his job. Why is the situation that way? The reason is Edgar has a wife who stays at home, who will take water for him to shower, will clean his clothes, clean the house, so that when Edgar comes back from work, he does not have to worry about all these things. She meets his psychological needs. When the children are sick, she's the one who takes care of the children. If there is anything, food that needs to be done, she does subsistence farming. She actually helps cover up the things that Edgar might not be able to cover. But no one quantifies this, right? And you will find that Edgar and his family will frown upon her if she wants to get out of this domestic sphere and go into the political world. And even if she decides to go to the political sphere, she's expected to come back home and still do all these domestic roles while also bringing in bread for the table. So I think that kind of summarizes the woman's political and economic and social situation in Uganda, but also in other East African states.
And I hear you saying that even care work determines how much time women have left in their hands to participate in public decision making. But I also hear you underscoring the fact that even in the private space, women are making critical decisions that actually contribute to the governance of our nation that is not recognized, not compensated, and not incorporated into the larger framework of decisions that are made by the state and should be. I'm going to invite Edgar to also just give us his thoughts about, what are these burdens that women are carrying as far as participation in leadership is concerned. And being a man speaking, I'm also interested in hearing from you how sometimes you have observed men participating in making that burden heavier. I carefully said observed so that we shall not say you are contributing to making it heavier.
Yes, thank you so much again, Stella. So I think all that these people say are actually, I think, they're evident society, so they happen, there's some burdens. But I also just need to say that some of them are general, they're cross-cutting. So for instance, because of just the setting how it is, if you participate in politics, I've personally gone to a place where I was trying to consult on if I became as an MP in that area, I would be elected. And the first comments were like, hey, first way, do you have a wife? If you don't have a wife, then you don't qualify. Do you have land? Do you stay here? You're not established as a man. So there are still those prejudices on how a man should be, perhaps even before you lead, that you must be married, have all this land and all those things that a young man would definitely be a challenge that is affecting. So the issue of prejudice and all those cultural notions, and this cross-cutting, not just really for women alone. So it's a burden that cuts across. Again, that means it's really true that those things happen. I do, however, think that there's generally maybe less belief in the power of the women to lead particularly. And it so much explains that why even many legal interventions happening have not necessarily yielded so much fruit. So, I think in Kenya, where they bring this, is it the 2/3 gender rule, but then the people themselves on the ground, when they get to be voting, they don't necessarily vote such many women. So you get to recognize that even when you can manage to put some safeguards legally, the people, the population on the ground, when they're still crowded by very many prejudices and all these notions and stereotypes, then there is no much that gets to happen. So I think it's something which has been recurring, regardless of the great effort that has taken shape in terms of policy and all those legal conversations that have been happening. So again, I think there is really that stereotype in society that is still very deep on how they view a woman in her full regalia. There's already a prescription of what a woman should be in a full regalia, a prescription of how a man should be in a full regalia. And so you find yourself in a position where I think as a woman, you have to, if you do this so much in politics, then you lose out on the other. Then you're not a good mother. Then in politics, then you become so shrewd and a nuisance the other side of society. So I think that balance then becomes so much heavy. But also particularly, I think from men, sometimes as well, because also the men also get to be pressured by the same society, of whereby if you married a woman and where traditionally you expected that that woman is always with you, or they can be with you there and make breakfast and etc. But this is a woman who turns out to be a lawmaker in parliament, is nowhere in policy. Society somehow feels like, hey, come on, even a man in your own house looks like you just married, you're the one who is married. Okay, to me, as if you're the one who is lesser, you're supposed to be more. So there are all those stereotypes that also then force men who would also maybe somehow have understood and actually supported this woman, but somehow also hold back and feel like, no, you need more hours here. Because otherwise the public out there thinks I'm not getting what man should be getting, I'm not getting a full time. So there are all these things that still cut across those predetermined prescriptions of what woman should be, and then that have also influenced men, therefore, not being so much comfortable with just people who would live and they view it from the lens of as if it will be somehow abandoning your responsibility. I think it has made things worse. Yeah, so the solution I think would be so much, both from the men to maybe appreciate the fact that I don't think a policy maker who has to go, anyone who works in a company somewhere has to go for work, then you would expect them to first wait some minutes later to first make breakfast. I think that may have to change. But also when you understand the economic benefits that comes with both parties, for instance, working. Because as opposed to the past, where the only thing would be you go and hunt and do whatever, but the current economic situation does not require that much of, those traditional ways. It requires so much money. And I think the more people in your household that are able to work and work comfortably, the better. So I think that's cause on why it becomes a very big obligation for both parties, men, women, and whoever in that ecosystem, even society itself, to develop the perceptions and ensure that the environment gets to be favorable, because it, in most cases, works to the advantage of both women, but also men, especially in terms of economic burdens and the rest at family level.
The more people who are able to work and work comfortably, and where comfortably describes equal pay, equal compensation for equal effort, and equal recognition for work. And when we talk about equal recognition for work, we're talking about equal recognition for work in terms of payment, but also equal recognition of work that is innovated by women. Research documents by women being acknowledged equally to the research documents produced by men, and by extension, research papers by people from the global south being recognized with equal measure as the research papers from people from the global north. There are disparities that have found their way from our colonial experience that are also being precipitated into the patriarchal state that we continue to have. And I hear you when you talk about, tapping onto the value of having a working family, or a family that has multiple sources of income, and making sure that both the man and the woman in this family, or the homeowners of this family, have access to opportunities to make decisions, and that their role is recognized. This morning, as we were interacting with the introduction session of the conversation on governance and politics, youth leadership for the Africa we want, we had a deep conversation with one revolutionary Pan-Africanist, Dr. Comrade Brian Kagoro, who indeed did allude to the words of Thomas Sankara, another revolutionary leader who had his mind very clear on what needs to happen for women to be able to be recognized in their participation in leadership. And he did say, we do not talk of women emancipation as an act of charity or out of a surge of human compassion. It is a basic necessity for the revolution to make sense. And as we say, it is a basic necessity for the revolution to make sense. One of the things we take recognition of is that he was saying we are not looking for equality in the sense of numbers, or equality in the sense of who sits where, but he was talking about equality before the law and equality in terms of labor wage. What are your thoughts about that? And I'm going to start with you, Edgar, because we finished with you. What are your thoughts about that kind of equality that he was describing, and how different is it from the kind of competition we are seeing now in our society, where the burden is no longer recognized? It's just about who is at the top of the conversation at the end of it.
Yeah. So I think I do agree so much. I think when we look at it in that perspective, it should be basic. It shouldn't even be an issue of law or anything. And it's even worse when you compare the current narrative, because then it's even so much an issue of debate on whether all these legal things that have been put are even visible or even important or really relevant. But I think from the other angle of just it being I think just something which is like out of common sense, really, not something you think that's even heroic because you've allowed more women to access work. Because then I remember even the right words were, the right to be, to become and to belong. Yeah, on how that's very important, because I think then is that fear gets to be reduced, because currently, and I think it was noted, we have a politician, I think in Uganda, called Utakano Chizabesije, and where the woman was worked with UN, very many organizations as well in the country, and there were very many people were wondering, but how does this woman and this man stay together? The woman is always in the other thing, the man is always in the other country. You can sense that people cannot even understand how it's possible culturally and all those things, that these people are able to work together and then be together. They're not divorced and all that. But then at least such examples can be a model show that it's possible. But at the same time, I think when it's really basic and normalized, then it creates some balance of cutting off that fear. Because now, and I think there's been an argument which has been lingering also on the fact that why would make men scared on having the women, for instance, go to work or even allow them to work that much? Because largely, I think in their mind is that there is maybe harassment at the job spaces, or maybe some other guy will take them, or they're not sure even how their woman got that job. Perhaps some boss did the same. But one can look at that from the view of that fear is perhaps caused by the fact that even that man thinks or has a mind that will do the same. Well, at least it will be enough motivation for you then to have the environment be free, so that you're comfortable that the way you treat women under you, right? If you treat them that right and they get the job done and they're on merit, then it should be enough. You should have enough comfort so that your woman also go and work, be employed somewhere, because you work with them and then you see they do good work. There wouldn't be bad reason as why you would hold back on letting even your own woman necessarily go and do just the same. So that question of why then does man get scared that woman should not work, it also has something that has to be questioned. Mm-hmm. What exactly motivates that fear? Is it what they see in their own spaces at work, that they see women taken advantage of and they keep quiet, so they think even their own woman will be subjected to the same? And then if that becomes the case, then what becomes the role of there? I think that could be a very nice conversation to explore. Yeah, but I think as for now, I don't think it should be something heroic. That I think it should be basic. That humans are humans as they are. And even though you don't necessarily believe in giving them favors and all these quotas, wherever, you can play the best simple role, which is not sabotage.
And you raise an interesting point, and I want to invite our audience to indulge us and just tell us what their thoughts are. But I want to just quickly come to Mercy with this same thought. Mercy, I hear Edgar saying, and the example he has given is of the Honorable Kizza Besigye of Uganda, who has vied for presidency a couple of times, who has married Winnie Byanyima, who happens to be holding very high positions in intergovernmental institutions, including UNAIDS right now, and has been at the helm of Oxfam Global, and has been holding quite critical roles in making decisions on behalf of different people. Because of the traditional way in which we view the family and how the family should be, people are uncomfortable about the idea that Winnie is probably not in the kitchen, is probably not taking care of children at home when this man is campaigning, and they constantly believe in their spirits that this family is dysfunctional. Is this a case of insecurity, as was described by Comrade Kagoro this morning? Insecurity that he said gives birth to jealousy, which is equal to pettiness, and he called it the Premier League of pettiness, which gives birth to cruelty, which gives birth to violence, and of course it becomes a vicious cycle. Or is it a different situation?
Stella, I think that when you look at the dynamics of why men are not comfortable with their women going to work and participating in the public sphere generally, I think a historic analysis of it would still take us back to the discussions on patriarchy and how, for over time, structural systems have been in place to keep women out of the public sphere. And I personally believe that the reason for this is because the men did not want women to own factors of production. That once a woman starts to work, then she has access to capital. Once she has access to capital, then she no longer needs a man to bring bread for her to the table, because now she can do that, right? And goes back to insecurity. Then a man starts to feel insecure because traditionally his role and society has made him believe that the only usefulness he has is to bring bread to the table. So once that usefulness is taken away from him, then he probably doesn't know who he is anymore. See? And I think that is the problem. But I think that men need to come to a realization that you can coexist with your wife when both of you are bringing in bread, because the world has changed. We evolve, and our economic systems also evolve. At the time when we still had the very basic roles of men going out to hunt and women taking care of the domestic space, it was okay then. But now we have to participate in globalization. We have to participate in trade and in all these different innovative ideas that have come up. And so that also means that the needs of the family have evolved. There is so much that now we need to do. Previously, formal education was not there. The children had to undergo informal education, apprenticeship and all that, which did not need a monetary fee tied to it. But now everything has been monetized. And when you look at the kinds of roles and you see, it becomes a complex thing, because now we also have factors of capitalism in play. And that means that if you find a man who is broke, his perception of women is even more complex than a rich man, because then he has issues that if my woman is working and she's bringing in more money, does she respect me? And sometimes the woman is just saying that, you see, I am now exposed. I know that there are women out there who are participating in decision making. I also want to have some of that in my home. And that creates friction in the domestic sphere. So for me, I feel like that is the problem, and what's causing people to think that, oh, you see, Winnie Byanyima probably does not do these kinds of things. That it's because they have over time been conditioned to think that way. But it is absolutely possible for a woman to participate in both the domestic and public spheres and do these roles very well. And I have also seen men who participate equally in the domestic and the public sphere. So if we then do an analysis of the men who are not comfortable with such a situation and those who are not, you start to realize probably that, they just don't have exposure to how productive a woman can be, not just in the public sphere, but also in furthering the cause of the home, in enriching and accumulating wealth for the family. So there has to be a total mindset change in both women and men, so that they can all realize the contribution that both genders can have in the family, but also in our governance structures.
And Mercy, if we are to push the envelope a little, I think we have encountered women who are married to men, have big income, sometimes even bigger than their husbands, and they have not stopped their men from being great.
Yeah.
The one example that we're discussing on the table is the Honorable Kizza Besigye, who continued to be great in his exploits of trying to be the president of Uganda. But then we can talk about the Right Honorable Prime Minister of Kenya, His Excellency Raila Odinga, whose wife has been the one who's running the businesses of the family.
Yeah.
And he would even say that sometimes he doesn't even follow up what happens with Spectra, for example, their company. She's the one who knows what happens there. And it did not stop him from being great. We have examples of women from across the continent who are doing exploits. They are married to men who did not cease to be great because of what role they play. Is it more about asking men to change, or more about telling the stories of the men who were never reduced by the fact that their women were thriving?
I think it's both. We need to do both, because you see, when you look at most of those men, and in one of the conversations that we were having in class, someone mentioned that could the problem now be, and it was an allusion to mental health, that the access we have to information has now opened our eyes to the problems that exist in society. And so, because of the information that we have access to, it has now made us realize that, oh, I can suffer from mental health, when 10 or 20 years ago, it wasn't a very big deal. Now, I think this allusion could also, be brought to this conversation. That before we had the whole conversation on feminism, before someone even came up to coin the word patriarchy, how were men and women engaging in society? Because these stories of women and men thriving successfully in, like, when the man and wife did not just come in this age and era. Even way back, we used to have chiefs who relied heavily on decision making on the words of their women. And they ruled very well. So what exactly is making this situation now so peculiar that men are all up in arms, and some women who are not exposed to this new revolutionary idea are also now crying that, oh, our fellow women are not doing the things that we are traditionally supposed to be doing. So I think that men need to open up, to change their mindset, and understand that women can also make a contribution. But we also need to tell these stories, both historical and present, about the women and men who are thriving, both in both domestic and public spheres, and doing very great, and their families are not about to get broken. Yeah.
Thomas Sankara saw women's emancipation as not only an ethical necessity, but as an intrinsic to the success, as something that is intrinsic to success of the Burkina Faso revolution. That truth can also be repeated about the general revolution that we're trying to achieve in the emancipation of our continent of Africa and in the emancipation of the global South from all the troubles that it continues to face right now. And the question I'm asking myself, even as Mercy opines, that we need to establish where this threat actually came up in the conversation. One of the questions I'm asking myself is, what are those critical decisions that women make in the domestic space that actually impact on how men present themselves in the public space? And I want to invite Lilian to just help me explore some of those decisions that women make in the private space that impact on how men present and how men function in the public space that are never recognized on a daily basis.
Actually, I'll go direct on using an example in Wajir, from my country, Kenya. There was a time when there was no peace in Wajir. And I think the first thing that came in mind of these women, they sat down. The Wajir women sat down and think of how they can bring peace in Wajir. And the first meeting that was held, the women sat down in a meeting and they asked themselves, what can we do so that, because at the end of the day, our children, we are losing our children in this community. We are also losing a lot. We cannot even walk out freely. We are in bondage. Then they sat down and they came up with a decision whereby they decided that they need peace they need peace in their area. So after deciding that they need peace, then they decided that they need to approach these men so that they can have a conversation with them and they could tell them the importance of peace in that area. And actually the first meeting, that during that time that they wanted to come out with the root cause of the problem. Why is it that Wajir was not peaceful? And then when they had that conversation with the men, and actually men were like, we cannot listen to these women. What can a woman tell me? And then when they were talking and holding several meetings, actually they came to realize that there was need of peace. And they realized that women were suffering. And they realized that their children were also suffering. And the people that were bearing that heavy burden were the women. So for me, I realized that we need to practice this in the whole of Africa. We need to come together. We need to sensitize our women so that they should realize that at the end of the day, they can do much better what men are doing. They need to realize and come up and speak out and also advocate for their rights.
Thank you very much. Lilian, I want to dig a little bit further with that question that I asked, and I'm going to attempt to problematize with Edgar. Edgar, you are a man who's very interested in politics, which is why you find yourself in the space you are in as far as diplomacy is concerned. And I think I can safely tell the audience that you're single. At least we are saying he's not married. In the event that you're engaging in politics as a man who's not married, what are some of the things you must do to look good in politics?
Oh, that's it's a broad question.
It's a very broad question. Please attempt.
Yeah, but to that extent, I'll first of all need to say the things I don't agree with so far. Because you see, there's a conversation here that makes all patriarchy seem all bad and everything. I don't agree with that. In fact, I would say patriarchy is a good thing. And I don't think patriarchy, in its form that is good, would in any way again go against women. And I'll tell you why. Because also, you see, there are the Winnies. We give examples of successful women who are able to do away with their women, with their men. I think in my argument, I would tell you that society, as much as we have evolved, society has evolved, our minds have not. So that even after this room, the mindset of this is a provider, traditional, still persists with many women, even those who are very empowered, that they would see you in the light of you must be a provider. That's the reality. The only thing I always argue for that sake, and again, which that even though you are patriarchal as how, there will still be no room for you to sabotage women, is just from the idea that society, because society has evolved, even when a woman, for instance, even if we were to agree that gender roles still exist, which I think are a good thing, my perspective, just as we need to recognize that a woman does not, for instance, need to still do the charcoal and all that hardcore. So if they can have their stoves and their maids, that's a good thing. The point is that they still can be able to take care of the family without their physical presence in the kitchen. But then the general notion, the general role of the kitchen and everything, the gender role still gets to them, just that they're not required to do it physical and be there and stand and cook. They can deal with who hiring the maid or that washing machine and everything. That's the argument. So the gender roles and everything still happens, just that in a better version, because that's where society is. So the gender roles and everything, to me, I think is still a very good thing. It's not an argument that should be entirely put out as if it's very bad.
I need to first of all notify my audience that my guests have gone rogue. But even as I mentioned that my guests have gone wrong, I'd like to ask Edgar a very direct question based on the statement he has just made. What is this about patriarchy that is so good?
One is that what I think about patriarchy is, and for a notion, is the idea that people, different roles have different genders have different roles in a community. And this has been the case previously when we had war. The men would be in charge of war because of their physique and everything generally, and women would be because of the needs of the parents and everything. We transition from that society of war to a better society where there is no more war. Again, the premise was that at that time, patriarchy is not as bad as portrayed, that women sat in a meeting and decided to lower women. I don't think that's something I buy. I think it was taking advantage of the needs in that way. The problem happens is that when you carry that mindset and bring it to a developed society as it is now, that's where the problem is. I think that is that we need to evolve that even when, then you need to appreciate that where there are no longer wars, there's no need to keep the women. Where their environment, where their skills, their talents can be utilized, they ought to utilize them freely without any sabotage.
Let me push a little further, Edgar. Do we have men in militaries around the world who are under the instructions of a woman as their boss?
Yes, they are.
Are those women spared when they need to appear before, to appear in war or to appear on the front line to defend their countries, or they play their role as the major general or whoever?
Yeah, they actually do play the role. And I see where you're coming. I just that, you see, like I said, generally, is that even in the army, there are fewer women who do that. There are always exceptions. So we cannot use the exception of women who would, even for men, you cannot say, for instance, that men are generally stronger than women. There are women who are stronger than men.
Absolutely. And when you say that men, there's sometimes when women are stronger than men, this would never have been discovered if the space was not created for them to participate. So gender roles are not cast in stone. The woman throwing the clothes in a washing machine is not cast in stone. The woman being in the kitchen cooking food for their children is not cast in stone. As a matter of fact, we have seen CEOs upon CEOs who say they love cooking, and sometimes some of them say their women don't even enter the kitchen to cook. It does not make them less men when they appear in public. What we are talking about here is not a transfer of responsibility, a complete transfer of responsibility to men. We are talking about an understanding of the burden that the woman needs to carry and how it interferes with her showing up for politics. And I think the argument that we're making here is that if they have to carry too much caregiving burden, it then stops them from being able to have sufficient time to participate in politics. And I think that's,
that's
the focus
true.
of the conversation.
Yeah, not agree.
And the question I was asking is, what do you need, or what do you need to do to present the ideal candidate in politics as a man?
I think the ideal candidate in politics would be as one who understands best what the society needs. And this has nothing to do with their gender, with their date of birth, or anything. This just has to understanding of what issues do they face and what exactly are the solutions to that. And like I said, then the decision of choosing that should not be on gender, it should purely on merit. That the person who proves that they have the best understanding of problems and also the best solutions to them, then they should be given the room to run. And I think if I was to be the candidate and try to prove that I'm the best candidate, it would be purely in those merits. But I also think if any person with the name of Mercy or Patricia, any female, it should be the same metric. The distinction I want to make very closely there is that, again, we should not just buy the idea that, because some women who've shown that means all women. And therefore, affirmative action and everything, I don't think we should do these things from the angle of just affirmative action because the woman has shown up. It should be as clear as it is. Just like how not all men will be good leaders, the same thing with all women. But then at the same time, we should not curtail or sabotage those women who have the talent, who have the skill or whatever to lead just because they are women. Yeah, I think that should be.
I like that you say it should be on the same metric.
Yeah.
When you say it should be on the same metric, I think language-wise, it implies that you have a recognition of the fact that it is not on the same metric. It should be, but it is not on the same metric. At this time, when it is not on the same metric, are we still talking about promoting the status quo, or are there certain things that we need to do to balance the playing ground?
Yeah, I think there's certain things we need to do to balance the ground. But my understanding, those things are not legal. So the legal conversation and everything, I find it always far-fetched and unrealistic. That even if we debated like that, I would be very happy, but it would be. I think the things we need to do here is general mindset change in terms of society. And part of it, and I need women to understand that I don't think it is justified for us just to recognize them because we ought to recognize them. They also have gotten a duty to show their best, but also understand the reality that not all of them deserve it. And then the duty on society, like I said, is as simple as not sabotage. I don't believe in the idea that we need just push women just because they're women or because of their virtue, because it's a feminism, because it's a balance, because the gender thing. I greatly believe, I think the women who qualify, who are good, far better even than men and many men, and they should be recognized as such and let take over. So the conversation on percentages, I don't always buy it because then it means as if there's some spaces, some slots in number that should be taken by just a virtue of one being a woman. I don't believe that argument. People should just be left to be women, be elected, I think, on merit. I think that's the environment should be created for them so that this bias is off. But to be particular now, like in workspaces, I think a lot has to change in terms of behavior because I think it's real, like they were mentioning, where then the women get to be given a position because the boss has interests and all those things, all be denied a position because you denied some favors from the boss. I think we also then get to have a responsibility personally as men who interact with these women so that the environment there is safer. Perhaps then when that is cleared and every man knows that the environment is safer, perhaps some men will not be scared then to perhaps feel that when the women get to these spaces, it's some space of exploitation. I think partly that's why, because they also recognize that the environment is not really safe for the woman. So there are also some questions lingering in their mind when their own woman gets to engage in that sort of environment that is not yet safe. So yeah, so I think there's a personal responsibility we've got to have in places where we do work with these women. I think that's what I would say.
Your argument seems to be quite slippery slope because you're saying that the space is equal and therefore only the qualified women should be taken, but you're also saying when they come into the space, they are going to have to meet a situation where sometimes the boss is asking for sexual favors, sometimes they're going to meet a situation, where they're denied promotion because there's a boss who needs them to do one thing or the other. And I want to bring Mercy into the conversation to deal with a number of things. The first one has got to do with the fact that you've said that the solutions cannot be legal. Mercy, when a boss is asking for sexual favors from individuals to promote them in the workplace, is there any other solution apart from a legal solution to to ensure that then the madness in the workplace stops?
Stella, I don't think that there is any other solution that can be done except the legal. And I think when Edgar says that, you see, these things should be done like by doing mindset change and all that, what he does not then realize is that even coming up with these frameworks to actually do these things, they have a legal basis for them. You cannot just wake up and say that I am going to Arusha in, say, in this place, for example, to do this. No, there are already structures that exist in place. You need to go and consult the local authorities that are there. They need to give you permission. So, and in again, in one of the modules that we had, the instructor was telling us that, you see, sometimes you cannot engage in a space unless you have permission to do that. That goes down to the legal. But then also, what we need to understand about the legal frameworks and how policies are formulated is that law is not a thing that lawyers just come, sit down, and then come up with the law and thrust upon people. No. One of the ways in which legal instruments are made is that the policy makers have identified a mischief in society, and they need to come up with a solution to address that mischief, and so then they write it down on paper and it becomes law. The other thing that we need to recognize is that not all law is written. There is soft law that is not written, and this is predominantly how most of our African states were actually governed. It doesn't mean that there were no laws then. There were actually laws. So there has to be a legal basis for most of these things. But also, as sovereign states and the way that diplomacy and relations work, we need to have laws in place such that we can have presence on the global sphere. So you cannot just come and say that, oh, you say for us as Tanzania, as the East African community, we just have mindset change. There are people even who should be subject to this mindset change, but they will ask you that, before you come and tell me this, where is the law that says that you can do this? Where is the law that says that as a man, I cannot take my energy, my muscles, and grab a woman at the workplace, and so there has to be law, because society in this day and era is ordered, and there has to be laws to show people what to be done. And you see, I think part of the reasons why men are even, going rogue and all these things, because some of them don't even know that there are laws in place to actually do this. Do you know how many NGOs are in place that are all the time going to communities telling them, do not rape women, do not do defilement, do not do child marriages. It is only when the branch of the law comes and they see a fellow man being arrested and put in prison for 20 years for defiling a child, and they will say that, oh, there is actually a watchdog. You see, but mindset change without legal backing cannot actually work.
Let's just rest on the words of Sankara, saying that it should not be an act of charity, but a necessity.
Absolutely.
And I want to push that conversation towards something that is not criminal. For example, like women's representation. We have had countries in Africa that have constitutions that do not have laws that compel anyone to include women in government. How well has the continent performed on that without laws?
Very poorly, I must say. It's been very poor. And you see, he gave the example of Kenya that has provision in the constitution for women representation in parliament. We know that currently in the East African community, Rwanda is doing very well. Uganda is also doing quite considerably well in terms of political representation of women. I think, you see, when Edgar says that, you see, there has to be like application of the same metric for both men and women to vie for a position. That statement, whereas it is politically correct, that statement ignores the fact that women have historically faced certain challenges that then put them at a place where they do not have the same access to these opportunities with men. So let's say that 10 feet from here, that is where the metric is. Right? And I'm sure most of you have seen that drawing that is usually drawn where a woman and a man are on a racing track, and in front of the woman you have a bag of beans, clothes to be washed, a cooking pot, and then the finish line is there. So let's say that where the finish line is where the metric is. But in order for this woman to reach where that metric is such an arduous task. It's a very, very groveling journey for her to just reach where that metric should be applied. So we need to first recognize the fact that even before you can tell a woman that, you can tell a political candidate that you need a senior 6 certificate in order to vie for the position of an MP, there are challenges that the woman will face in her journey to gain that certificate, right? And those are the things that we need to first address. Because if we do not address these things, then women do not have equal access with men. Because a man will just wake up and go to work, and go to school, for example. A young girl will have to wake up in the morning. When I was in P3, by the way, around P3 and P4, I had to first wake up, clean the compound, do the dishes, and go to school. My brother would just get up and go to school. He had nothing. But if, say, for example, when I then joined secondary school and I got to the point where I had to experience my menstrual period, in a week, 4 days out of the month, I was having cramps, my mood swings, I could not attend class. Now, if you say in every 4 days of every month, a girl is experienced, and some girls even take the whole week, compute that in the number of weeks the girl has to do to undergo through that in a year.
208 days.
Yes. And yet the man, for him, he has no challenges like that. All his days are fine. So you can see then that there is an equal ground, an equal footing, and there have to be legal policies in place to recognize the fact that biologically and historically, women have been denied that equal access to reach these opportunities before you can even apply the same metric, right? Mm-hmm. So unless all of them are now free and able to reach that point, then we can talk about applying a metric.
So for me, I stop at that place where we say, as we lean on the weight of the words of Thomas Sankara, that we say it should not be a charity but a necessity for the liberation to make sense. And I'm asking myself a question that I think I want Lilian to respond to. You come from a country where the women in the country had to wait until one nominated member of parliament came to parliament and tabled a bill on sexual harassment. Before that, there were parliamentarians, members of parliament representing men and women and children who never sat down one day to think about sexual harassment, never sat down one day to think about provision of sanitary towels to young women, and even the issue of taxation of those sanitary towels. You also come from the same country that has laws that allow for laws that create space for women's representation, and now create spaces for the existence of women's representatives and the existence of nominated and women even in the county assemblies, and a zebra kind of balance of male and female for the county assemblies. Do you think these two things would have been possible if the laws did not dictate that they should happen?
For me, it could not be possible because from my country, we are bound by the laws, and we realize that in most cases, women are really suffering. And when women are suffering from my country, women are suffering, and when we don't have any woman from any corner who can come out strongly and speak out on behalf of women, then there's nobody who will care about them. And then when we are talking about the MPs, we are talking about also we have governors right now in our country who are women in our country. You'll realize that women are still behind in a way. Like, I'll use an example of one of the governor from Meru, whereby she's a governor, and still she feels that she cannot work without a man. She's giving his husband she's giving the husband an opportunity to be in front instead of her be taking care and controlling of everything as a woman because she's the one in power. She feels that when she's in charge or when she's in power, and he will feel that the husband will feel like he doesn't have a name as a husband in the house. Another thing that is really happening in our country and is very common, for example, Stella, let me just use this as an example. You are my husband, we stay in the same house, and then here we wake up in the morning, we are going to work. You are my husband, yes, I'm a woman. You wake up in the morning, you will prepare very early in the morning, and then you go to work. You don't even mind that there are children behind. We need to take equal responsibilities. For example, we are talking right now about 50-50, sharing equal responsibilities. When I sit back and imagine about the 50-50, I realize that women are carrying a lot of burden, because when men are saying that we are sharing equal responsibility, we are waking up, everybody is waking up very early in the morning, we are heading to work. Then the little that I get, we put on the table of us. At the same point, you realize that at the workplace where we are working, realize that maybe we have the same qualification, me and the same man. For example, your husband may be a doctor and you are also a doctor, and maybe you are working in an organization as a researcher and all that, but you realize that men are given first hand and they'll earn a lot of money more than you, because and you are doing the same, you are playing the same role in the same company in the name that they are providing, and this one does not add up. And in really sense, women are really they are drained in such a way that there's nobody who can speak for them, and there's nobody who can come out strongly, because someone feels that let me just sit in this working situation because I don't have any other alternative. I better get the little that I'm getting, and then I go back in the house, because when I raise up my voice, then it will be the end of me.
Thank you very much, Lilian. We are not out of conversation. We are out of time. I'm going to allow my guests to give their closing statement in 30 seconds each. I will start with Lilian, and then I'll proceed to Edgar, and I'll give Mercy the last word.
One thing that I love to tell the whole world is that we as youths and young women, we need to stand up strongly and advocate for our rights and support one another, so that at the end of the day, we can have a continent that we have equal responsibility, both women and men.
Thank you so much, Stella. It was an honor to be here. But just to the end, maybe for context, because I think I was taken out of context on some issue about how we don't need the law, how the solution is not legal. It's not that I don't understand that law is important. The thing is that law comes after values, and here I recognize a lack of values. So it doesn't matter if you go and you say we need 80% percentage as women as law. When society does not feel that or understand that, then the legal does not become the solution to that. That was the context. But beyond that, also, I think it has been a nice conversation. I think there is still room for improvement in having safer places, because as much as there's some good access to some women who have fought things, there are others, women, a big portion that is still facing challenges because of that lack and shortage in values, that I think we still have a chance and a room where we can collectively, both men and women, have a safer environment in such spaces. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Mercy, please help me land this plane.
Yeah, so it's been a lovely conversation, and in my parting remarks, I just want to say that we need to recognize the undue burden that women have had to carry over time, and the fact that these burdens have impeded their participation in leadership and governance. And our legal frameworks, our policy frameworks as the East African community, because we are seeking for integration, needs to portray this and needs to come up with solutions towards this, because we need to recognize the fact that women are big contributors in production, but also in terms of effective and fair leadership governance in the region. So hopefully everyone will rally up and stand with the women so that we can participate in governance fairly.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. You realize that we have not been able to conclude this conversation. That goes to tell you that the conversations we're having in the public space have not brought out a conclusion anyway. We just are going to continue leaning in the words of Thomas Sankara and to say that women's emancipation is not going to be done as a matter of charity, but it has to be done as a matter of necessity for the liberation to make sense. And he even adds to say that the authenticity and the future of our revolution depends on women. And he further says nothing definitive or lasting can be accomplished in our country as long as a crucial part of ourselves is kept in this condition of subjugation, a condition imposed by various systems of exploitation. When he continues to talk about subjugation and consistent exploitation, this narrative applies to the struggle and the revolution in Burkina Faso. It applies to the struggle and the revolution in the continent of Africa, and indeed it applies in the struggle conversation on revolution between the relations on the global north and the global south. There's plenty to discuss and very little time to do it, but this conversation has to continue our way from the studio. We trust that you're going to continue this conversation. This is MSTCDC, the Danida Fellowship Center, with the support of the Swiss government, bringing you this podcast from MSTCDC Arusha, where we gather Pan-African movements to have conversations, and the East Africa Community Youth Fellowship Cohort 1 has come out to have this conversation with you. Let's continue with this conversation. We look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, goodbye.